Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dungeon of Deadly Delights. I'm, of course, Rob DiLauro, and with me, as always, is Miss Holly Interlandi. Holly, what is going on?
Hello.
The world is on fire.
It
I
is.
mean, that's
It
really
is.
all there
Pretty
is to say.
Yeah.
This is episode 30 of Dungeon of Deadly Delights, which is, technically a milestone again.
Crazy.
Woo. So we actually, we were initially going to do revenge films. That was going to be the topic for this week. And then through myself and Holly's little war room, we had decided that maybe the best thing to do in these times of turmoil and hopeful change, we wanted to really spotlight black horror cinema in a positive way. And I want to put a disclaimer out there for anybody. This is not to put anybody on Jump Street, not for any kind of virtue signaling. This is really, honestly, just, Black lives do matter, and they are very important in our genre also. And we wanted to, shed that light on that history. So that's why we're doing this.
We always try to be as diverse as possible with our topics. We try to find, foreign films from all races, genders, and sexualities. But right now I feel like we need to do this show as basically a symbol of our solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protests, because I've been seeing a lot of
negativity,
disturbing stuff on social media that is very disheartening, and I wanted to make it clear where we stand.
Mm-hmm.
Also a lot of the Black Lives Matter founders and a lot of the people involved are creative people. They're writers, they're poets, they're filmmakers, or TV writers.
Absolutely.
And I think spotlighting that creativity is really important right now.
We were all, both of us were in the same agreement. So, like I said, we're not doing this to be niche, because that would be fucking weird. We really just, like we said, we just want to showcase black horror cinema. I mean, this is a topical show, and this just seemed like the perfect time to do it. Now, I also want to put it out there that, we do understand that we're both, white media entertainers. We don't have all the answers. We don't necessarily understand what the black experience is like. We're just trying to, just kind of guide you into the best of black horror cinema, and also the dark history behind it, because it wasn't all roses. So, we're going to be talking about some of
I also wanted to mention a bunch of upcoming films that I think prove how the black horror world is opening up and getting an audience, and getting out there. So, At any rate.
All right. Well, let's get into it. With that, also want to let you know that, we're going to be talking about some really bleak history when it comes to cinema, and it's going to be a slight progression into more positive, obviously, but we kind of want to work from the bottom of the barrel and work our way up into where we are today. So just so you guys know that too. And I also want to cite the documentary on Shudder. It's an incredible documentary called Horror Noir.
Absolutely.
It's fabulous if you guys haven't seen it. And I actually got a lot of good history from watching that too. So
a lot of great comments straight from horror icons' mouths, and straight from even bad experiences in horror from black icons.
So with that, Holly, what are we going to be talking about first on our list here?
Well, it's really interesting because I feel like there's a quote on the horror noir, to advertise horror noir, essentially, which says that black history is black horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really imperative to understanding about what's different about the history of black horror versus mainstream horror. Mm-hmm. Is that they weren't conjuring up monsters from outer space.
Right.
Like they were suffering and still are on this planet. They didn't. I mean, so there was. It's almost.
Well, it really sickens me to say this, but in many ways, the monster was us. It was me and you.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They had enough monsters here in the real world. They didn't have to make their own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear. A lot of that is clear from early attempts at portraying history on film, which are just. I've actually never been able to bring myself to watch Birth of a Nation because it freaks me out so much. I don't think I could watch it and not just rage.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Birth of a Nation because obviously when it came out, it was considered a technical achievement, even though there was actually feature films that were also already being made in like Italy, I believe, one that came out of Sweden. But this was the one. This was the film that really like set the bar for feature filmmaking, and it was Thomas Dixon, and it just. I mean, I watched clips of this thing, and I know that if you're in a film school, it's required viewing for a lot of students, and I don't quite understand why. I guess I guess you should remember it for its really dark history. There's really a lot of dark background to this. This is as Dave Chappelle would call it, just just world class racism.
Well, yeah, I mean the film is basically white propaganda. I mean, it's basically this is how we conquered our great country and made these savages into regular people or whatever. Like it's
and they took over democracy.
Yeah.
And all the black men were pretty much sex starved for white women, and
Yep.
the Klan were the superheroes of this of this story. I mean,
I don't want to watch it, so I don't blame anybody who doesn't want to watch it.
Yeah.
You just have to acknowledge its existence.
It's really not something I really want to get into that deeply. But that's unfortunately, I would say the grave marker for the evolution of black cinema. Unfortunately, that's where it starts. And then the next movie we wanted to focus on is one called Ingagi, which came out obviously like years after Birth of a Nation. But Ingagi was another one. And if you guys are giant monster movie fans, which I am, I was raised on the original King Kong. Ingagi was basically about an expedition where this man had discovered that black women were being sold to these gorilla creatures as sex slaves, and they were actually portrayed by white women in blackface. And as I said, when it comes to King Kong, RKO Pictures was actually only willing to finance the original King Kong due to Ingagi. And to also get into King Kong really fast, there's a lot of black historians who do believe, if you have seen the original King Kong, the tribesmen obviously are very stereotypical.
Oh, yeah.
But also like I said, a lot of black historians actually believe wholeheartedly that Kong himself was like pretty much portrayed as a
he's supposed to be a sympathetic character, I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I love King Kong. I love the original King Kong.
Yeah.
But the whole like portraying this dark island with, dark tribal people chanting and stealing a white woman. I mean, all of that is super terrible.
Yeah.
And you just sort of have to take it for what it is in its time period context. But I think Kong as an icon, like himself as a monster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wonder if he carries that kind of baggage with him.
I'm just saying that a lot of people actually like have that notion that they felt that
Yeah.
Kong was kind of portrayed as a, you know, as a person of color, as opposed to just this, giant, gorilla. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of context there. There's a lot of, you know, there's some thin lines there. Um, but it's interesting how something like Kong, becomes so socially acceptable, or at least when I was growing up, it was totally fine. You
Oh
know,
yeah. Because of course it doesn't occur to us. We're like, oh yay, giant monkey man, giant ape, woohoo, monster.
but if a millennial watches this shit, oh, that's when that's going to change, I believe. That yeah, there's a really lot of deep context within King Kong. But Ingagi is kind of like the inspiration for King Kong. And then, of course, we want to talk about Son of Ingagi, which was actually the sequel, technically, to Ingagi, which was an all-black cast. It actually, the two films don't meet at all. The director, obviously, it was a black director, black cast for the first time. And the interesting thing about Son of Ingagi was they actually portrayed a woman named Dr. Jackson, who was a scientist who had brought this half man, half ape creature back to the States. But it was interesting because you never really got to see a person of color as a scientist or anything of that nature before that. And also the other interesting thing about Son of Ingagi was you actually, for the first time, just got to see black people just living like the normal life. You know what I mean? Like,
And not in the context of white people.
hmm?
And not in the context of white people.
Right, exactly. So you saw
for every other movie where a black person would be cast as the maid or something.
Right. No, they were, it was a, husband and wife, and they lived in a house, and you saw like, just a regular, wedding, you know what I mean? It wasn't like some birth of a nation wedding or anything like that, you know what I mean? Like, where I'm sure it would just be crazy and absolutely like ridiculously racist. It was just, it was just a black experience, like seeing black people for the first time living their lives and having a normal existence. But that would be kind of like the jumping off point to where you're seeing more progress within the way, black people are portrayed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Ingagi would definitely be the first thing. And what goes on after that, Holly?
I mean, I would argue that we can skipping over the 40s and 50s, which were white. Like I love 50s like atomic crazy.
That's because the 40s and 50s skipped over black America, like, completely.
Like, there is nothing in like 50s sci-fi cinema that has anything to do with people who aren't white.
No.
And that's just
because it was the atomic age, and like, in the minds of of the producers and directors at that time, the smart people, the scientists, and all the people that have to do with the atomic age would obviously be white.
Exactly.
There wouldn't be a black person with a lab coat, even though Son of Ingagi proved that's not true. They decided that they were going to go that route. So there was literally like a disappearance of black actors, like in sci-fi, and like all that for a very, very long time.
Yeah. It's really blatant too if you go back and watch some of those movies. But I think that brings us to my favorite horror movie of all time, which we've already talked about, but I think is also really important in this discussion, Night of the Living Dead.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I feel like I've talked extensively to both John Russo and Russ Streiner about this film, and the making of it, and how their intentions were not to make a statement or anything like that. But
he was just the best actor for the job.
But the fact is the film did become a statement, and they acknowledged that later on. They were like, yeah, okay, I guess we were making the movie in 1968, which was a very tumultuous political time, and There was a lot of upheaval, and you know, some of that probably seeped into our filmmaking, but also it proves that both the creator and the audience are equally important in bringing meaning to a film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead became the meaning for a lot of people, that it was the first Black hero they'd seen on screen who
took charge,
regardless of being Black.
And took charge. And he said, you know, he told them, he says, you could be the boss down there. I'm the boss up here. And that was the first time, I'm sure, where, you know, like, if you were a young Black person sitting in that theater for the first, you know, like seeing Night of the Living Dead, like you were just like, you're probably in tears. You know what I mean? Like how like a lot of women reacted to seeing Wonder Woman on the screen for the first time would probably be the same exact thing. It would just be mind blowing. You've never seen anything like that before. A Black man taking charge and telling white people what to do. It was
and being right every time.
Every single step of the way.
Fuck themselves up, and the character of Ben is just right every time.
It's interesting too because you know, when it comes to Night of the Living Dead, from what I'm gathering, is you know, obviously like an experience that I didn't quite gather. I mean, I caught the context of it, but if you're a Black audience member and you're watching Night of the Living Dead, it's not necessarily the zombies that are frightening you. It's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Because you feel, I personally feel that those white guys that were supposedly hunting the undead, they shot him because he was Black and threw him on the pyre.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
That may not, again, like I said, that may not have been, you know, an intention of the filmmakers, but it becomes just as important symbolically because that's, I mean, that's the you know, the situation that is so traumatizing and continues to be an issue today. Like, you know, you're Black, you get shot, and that.
Well, I mean, if you're watching that movie, like watch it, you know, now, you know, and you know, like the fact that we're actually talking about this particular moment in the film that a lot of people normally don't talk about, unless you're supremely fucking blind. You know, that man standing by that window doesn't look like a dead person. You know what I mean? So I just feel, if it wasn't, you know, contextually within the script, those men shot him because he was Black, and that was the thing that really terrified African American audiences. It wasn't the undead, it wasn't the, you know, the eating of flesh, it was that. And that's, you know, as wonderful and classic as a movie as that is, that's super disheartening.
Well,
that's
also,
the thing they got.
I'll get to this later, but it also informed what Jordan Peele decided to do with the ending of Get Out, which I think is really interesting. Because the Night of the Living Dead did have such a huge impact on, you know, Black horror fans, and you know, it's that movie is brutal. And I just that movie is so good, and it's still incredibly powerful and just disturbing. And like, if you haven't watched Night of the Living Dead for some bizarre reason, like I don't like old movies in black and white or whatever, you are doing yourself a huge disservice.
If we're talking about Dawn of the Dead, obviously it had more to do with consumerism and, you know, capitalism than race relations. But you know, if you look at the very beginning of Dawn of the Dead, the inner city scene, that was definitely racially charged. That scene, it just shows you basically that the fears that the white person has when it comes to the inner city. Like in this, you know, in this particular case, if you're in the inner city, you're fucked. So you need to be in the white suburbs where there's a mall. You know what I mean? Like you need to be in, you know, in a whiter area, I guess, to, you know, to defend yourself and be able to survive. Because in the inner city, like, you know, you're just fodder, you know, for the slaughter, I guess.
Yeah, God, yeah.
And I got that from it the first time that I watched it. So not necessarily calling Romero negative. I think he was just kind of mirroring what a lot of white people feel when it comes to the inner cities and stuff, like, oh shit, we're in the city, roll up your fucking windows, kids, that kind of thing. So yeah, again, like Dawn of the Dead, everything that Romero does, I mean, we talked about it before, is just as simple as it is, in terms of its narrative. I mean, there's so many, like, so many hidden meanings and ideas.
Yeah.
The man was just like, he was just he's just very poetic with the way he did things without saying a word. You either get it or you don't. You see a fun, dumb zombie movie, or you see contextually what he's trying to tell you. Brilliant man. He's missed. Definitely missed. So, all right. So, can you continue on with Duane Jones? Duane had actually only done one of two films that were kind of prominent. As Holly was telling me, he did a few more, but they didn't quite take.
Yeah, he did a couple in the 80s that were sort of B-movie, cliche horror movie fests, but nothing significant, really.
But there is this experimental film he did in 1973 called Ganja and Hess. It was written by Bill Gunn, who was he's a screenwriter. He's also a prolific poet. And honestly, it really was a slow burn film. It wasn't very action packed. We're going to get into the blaxploitation era and all that stuff, but it basically just kind of showcased Duane Jones' ability as an actor. Once again, he plays an anthropologist who is
actually a professor in real life. Duane Jones, a professor in theater, and yep.
Certainly. So he is looking into an African group called the Murthians, and they basically like they drink blood to a certain degree. And then when somebody tries to kill themselves in the home, he kind of talks them out of it, but not without being stabbed by this Murthian dagger, which kind of turns Duane Jones into, I wouldn't necessarily even say just a vampire. I think it kind of played on the tropes of drug addiction, where he, really did, he does become addicted to blood. And that's where Ganja comes in, and Ganja is a woman who he falls in love with. And they kind of go on this, vampiric romp together. Like I said, it's interesting to talk about this one because if you're looking at it, through a certain lens, it's different than anything that's been seen before in African American cinema. Like I said, it's very experimental. It's doesn't really have like an ABCD narrative. Very artful to many degrees. And again, that's another reason why it's praised, to the point where even Spike Lee actually remade it. It was called the Sweet Blood of Jesus. But Ganja and Hess was actually critically praised and got a standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival in that time period. But this is the first time where we're actually really just seeing some really like artful, like work coming out of Black directors and storytellers at this particular juncture. And that's why Ganja and Hess is important. So what is next, Holly?
Well, I feel like I delved way into 70s blaxploitation films because although they're not remembered for being horror necessarily, I feel like it's one of the first times when like Black filmmakers and Black actors really just they took charge and they did whatever they wanted in the film. Essentially, a lot of it was crazy and bizarre and just super like cringy and or violent or anything. And I think,
well, what's really interesting is these like white-owned dime store production companies at that particular time period were actually seeing that having Black actors in your films were actually viable to make money. So that's why they put, like money into these, technically independent films, you know what I mean, that showcase these, Black characters that are larger than life, you know what I mean, to draw an urban audience to the theater for the first time. So
yeah, but it also allowed for Black directors to get behind the lens for the first time, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is significant.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you can watch any number of these things. There are a lot of them that are just obscure, maybe you've never heard of. I was watching one called Petey Wheatstraw, which is
Mm-hmm.
totally bizarre and involves a stand-up comedian they call the devil's son-in-law, and he sells his soul to the devil, and so he can come back to life, and it's just really, really bizarre. A lot of people don't look at blaxploitation films as necessarily like horror films, but there are a lot of genre elements to them, like beyond just spy genre. But
Mm-hmm.
they would put in some just really random, like, monster demon stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, well, we were going to talk about Sugar Hill, is for example.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the other interesting thing at this point, at this stage in the blaxploitation era that we're talking about right now, the other interesting thing that was starting to happen was that that African American women were starting to become the focal point. And like, although there's like obviously there was a strength displayed there with a lot of Black female characters, there's also a fear, and one of them being that apparently all Black women knew voodoo. So that was a big underlying thread in a lot of blaxploitation movies.
Yeah. And that kind of thing wormed its way into non-Black cinema as well. Like, just experimental films for, like, oh, it's voodoo, it's a witch doctor, it's got to be a Black woman. It's like, oh god, okay. But I feel like there's a lot of undiscovered crazy shit in the 70s from the blaxploitation era that doesn't get enough lip service, just because it may not have been made like a giant splash or a whole bunch of strides for the horror business or whatever, but it's still really fun and worth watching.
Oh yeah. You know what? I'm going to die on this hill. I love the blaxploitation era as a film fan. There's so much good stuff there. I mean, obviously, like, guys like Quentin Tarantino mined a ton of it, because it was so good. It really is. It's a fantastic era, but at the same time, it's also kind of saddening too, because if you look at it, from a certain lens, I mean, obviously there was a lot of stereotypes like still there, but at the same time, you also had this moment where Black people were finally sticking it to the man, you know what I mean? And we were, going to talk about Sugar Hill, and Sugar Hill is absolutely one of those where you had this beautiful lead Black actress, and also, she was sticking it to the man because, her boyfriend, her pimp boyfriend got murdered, and she knows voodoo, and she ends up, creating a horde of zombies to go after these white guys that wanted this club that this guy owned. Actually, her boyfriend was a club owner, and it's interesting too, because we didn't necessarily we kind of glossed over that, but if you guys aren't familiar, before Romero and John Russo, zombieism was very stereotypical back in the day.
It was all to do with voodoo. It was all to do with mysterious Haitian witch doctors who would bewitch a number of people and would then become under their command, and that was their zombie horde.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't move independently. They were always, subject to the whim of whatever wizard had conjured them up.
But I think also the other thing too, at that particular juncture of zombie films, before they became the undead, was that you were terrified of the Black man, because the majority of the people that were under this control, it was like, oh no, watch out for the Black man. You know what I mean? Well, let's talk about another cultural phenomenon before we leave blaxploitation, and a very powerful character, that really also changed the game when it comes to Black cinema. And as silly as the name was, Blackula, super important in the genre.
And it's interesting because, as you well know, I was editor of Famous Monsters for almost a decade, and Blackula was one of the first films featured in Famous Monsters that had a predominantly black cast,
Hmm.
because the monsters before that were always, white guys or people in makeup, or they didn't you couldn't see their skin or their face or
Hmm.
whatever, and it's really interesting, and the editor didn't really make a big deal out of it at all. He was
Hmm.
just like, Blackula, new Dracula movie, woohoo! And it was like,
Hmm.
yeah. But to see that, like, all of a sudden, it made you realize that the history of horror really did have, like, a changing point.
Well, the really cool thing about Blackula is actually the intro where he's talking to Dracula, who is a out and out racist, and he's just basically trying to dispel slavery, and Dracula just basically goes, you know, um, get rid of slavery. Like there's a lot of great things that come from this, and
That's
then he
something
looks over at his.
it's also something that not a lot of vampire movies address. It's like these vampires have been around for hundreds of years, and somehow they have really progressive ideals.
Right,
I'm not
right.
sure how that works.
So you have this really strong black man with a awesome, amazing voice, and just very, very, like, well to do and powerful, and he's telling off Dracula, and Dracula says something, like really cold, when it comes to his wife, and he says, you know he starts looking at his wife, and he goes, are you looking at my wife a certain way? And he goes, obviously, like, if you have a woman of color, like, you're going to look at her, like, in that manner or something like that, and he goes, are you sick? You know what I mean? Like, are you serious? Like, you're doing that in front of me? And just the way he carried himself, just that power, he had that posture, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That I would actually, like, put up there with, say, Sir Christopher Lee in the Hammer films. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just this
and he got a
very
sequel.
strong stature for the first time. Seeing an African American man playing a vampire like that, and saying things like, your cognac is distasteful as your mana. Um, yeah, and it kind of played on the same ideas as Bram Stoker's Dracula. And a lot of people who have actually seen the film had said that if they had seen his performance in this blaxploitation movie about Dracula, turning this man into a vampire and calling him Blackula as a curse, a lot of people say Bram Stoker would actually be proud of this performance.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
because we always talk about Gary Oldman, we always talk about this person and this person and this person, but this is a really powerful performance.
Yeah, and also gets overlooked when talking about Dracula performances in general.
I agree, absolutely. And the other cool thing that I wasn't aware of, but he was actually the first king of cartoons in Pee-wee's Playhouse. So
Random trivia.
let the cartoon begin. Um, Fantastic character actor. And then, of course, there was the sequel, Scream, Blackula Scream, which was actually the introduction of Miss Foxy Brown herself, Pam Grier. And that's super important. Also the fact that she was, kind of portrayed as she was the assistant to a voodoo priestess. But again, we're in a situation where, not only are we seeing just a gorgeous, black woman, like kind of, like co-starring in this movie, but also, the fact that she also has, she has power as well.
Yeah.
So things are starting to get better on the trail right now. And then we get into the 80s. So, of course, we're in the 80s now, and we get into the slasher era. And, there was this running gag where, like if you see a black person, like in an 80s slasher, like they're dead in like the next, the first like 20 minutes.
Well, for one thing, I mean, what we need to say about slashers is that it's a film that basically relies on its body count.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a movie where you go in and you're like, okay, there's one perpetrator and he's going to kill a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's part of where it became acceptable to sort of add token races in there, because
Yeah.
they didn't actually have to do anything. They were just there to be fodder.
Mm-hmm.
And so people could like pretend they were being like, oh look, I'm being inclusive. I'm casting this black person in this, and it's like, but they're just victims who get picked off every time. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to look at it in terms of it just being a pile of dead bodies.
Well, then you get into things like into things like Return of the Living Dead and stuff, where like an African American punk rocker on film. Wow.
Yeah.
And honestly, in my opinion, and this doesn't get talked about at all, honestly. But I think I don't know if it's the first black survivor in a horror film. But Roger from Night of the Demons is super important. In the original Night of the Demons, directed by Kevin Tenney, because what a lot of people don't really talk about is that not only did he survive until the end, like Roger was very, he just didn't seem like the type that would be able to defend himself. You know what I mean? Like in this situation, with Angela and this, this whole supernatural event and stuff. He just kind of.
I've actually never seen Night of the Demons, so forgive me.
Never seen Night of the Demons? Wow.
I've been smiling and nodding, so I apologize.
That's okay. No, I mean, I'm just saying that the character of Roger was, like he wasn't like the badass hero at the end, but he was able to, like save, his friend and like he knew what to do. He was very sharp when it came to, like certain ideas, how to escape certain things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, he is a survivor at the end of the original Night of the Demons. And I think that's super important. And I don't know why, like horror, whatever you want to call it, historians or whatever, don't talk about him, but he's definitely on the list of importance, I would think, when it comes to the slasher genre that we're talking about right now. So then we get into the 90s, which I'm really excited about, because this is where we get in some really cool stuff.
Tony Todd,
yeah. Let's talk about Candyman for a second. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's really unique because Candyman is really, I mean, if you don't count Blackula, really the first horror villain icon, kind of like a Freddy Krueger or a Michael Myers or those kind of horror icons. The first black horror icon in that tradition. But at the same time, he's in a movie full of white people, white women.
Mm-hmm.
So he's terrifying. Tony Todd is fantastic in the performance, like just great.
Yes.
But it also sort of rubs the wrong way now because it's the inner city slums thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it, that a lot of Candyman takes place in like these inner city graffiti.
Yeah, it was actually filmed. It was filmed in Chicago in a place called Cabrini Green, which is ironically enough where Tony Todd actually grew up. He grew up in that project.
I did not know that.
Yes, he did. Yeah. And they ended up knocking it down a few years ago, I think. Obviously there's and that's something that I'm so excited about when it comes to the remake of Candyman, because they do, talk about the themes of gentrification, which obviously was the reason that they, knocked down Cabrini Green in the first place to, obviously like modernize the city and, take away the dirt and the grit or whatever. But Tony Todd, like says, as hard scrabble as that place was, it was his favorite place to be. Absolutely adored living in Cabrini Green. Talked
Yeah.
so much about life, and
But in the film, it's sort of played as like, oh, don't go into the projects because Candyman will get you. Like it has sort of that same thing we were talking about with Dawn of the Dead, like where the inner city is like, ooh, scary.
yeah.
It's just that this time it was specifically a supernatural villain that
Mhm.
was doing the scary.
Well, what was really fascinating about him, not even just as the boogeyman, but also, you got Freddy Krueger, obviously, like, he's a horrible guy, child murder and stuff like that. But then you have Tony Todd's character, who's basically, he was an artist, and like his only crime was falling in love with a white woman, and they ended up, chopping off his hand, and like, basically like, just kind of making him just bees, and just really horrible, horrible stuff that obviously harkens back to the to the past, and like just the horrific slave days. You know what I mean? And dare I say, like that really kind of gets amped up in the sequels that a lot of people don't talk about. But there's some really great narrative threads there in the sequels. When it comes to his character, I think you get to understand him as a character a bit more if you delve into those particular sequels. I definitely want to reflect on Tales from the Hood because, first of all, there's really nothing like it in terms of anthologies. Maybe aside from, say, the Twilight Zone or something like that. And I think, people, hear, like Tales from the Hood, people are automatically going to think, oh God, this is some like fucking stereotypical bullshit or whatever. And it's really fucking not, guys, if you haven't seen it. It is a movie that, plays into racism, plays into police brutality, plays into abuse, within the African American home. It plays into all these different things, which are kind of threaded into these three drug dealers that are looking for drugs at this funeral home. The shit. And this mortician is basically telling him these stories as he's showing him all these different coffins of dead bodies that were actually at the in the morgue. And one of them plays into this black cop who works for the LAPD, and there is this civil rights leader that's basically like taken out of his car, beaten brutally by these white cops, and like this man has to basically just watch this all go down. And it's basically like hey, you're our brother, you're a brother of the badge, you're not going to let anybody know about this, this and that. So he does keep it a secret, is like for a good while. He ends up leaving the LAPD, but they just disgrace this guy. They put stuff in his car. They make him look like a heroin addict. He looks like a complete and utter hypocrite, to the community. So as this, black cop is, pretty much, he's off the force. He's a drunk at this point. He doesn't necessarily he doesn't necessarily talk about this, these accounts. He doesn't go to anybody, doesn't, reveal it to anybody. But it's interesting because, kind of like in Dead Alive fashion, the cops are actually pissing on the civil rights leader Morehouse's grave, and he grabs one of them by the testicles and pulls them down and rips out their heart. Fabulous special effects, by the way, in this movie. Fabulous special effects. And that just has to do with this soul, finally, getting justice for, being murdered brutally by the police, which very poignant.
That's what it still happens.
Very poignant. And then, you've got one where Corbin Burnson is, playing like a really racist politician. And it kind of has to, has to do with these African dolls that basically attack him by the end of the movie. Because he's actually like, he's being slammed for, living in a plantation house. And there was this painting of this voodoo priestess with all her dolls, and she's cradling them. And
Probably a reference to a Black Devil doll from hell.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But I think the most interesting thing about, or the interesting story within is, you have David Alan Grier playing an abusive boyfriend, and he even has a tattooed monster on his arm. And the craziest thing about this particular story is that, at this point you're seeing David Alan Grier in all these comedies and Living Color, this and that, and this is really the first time where you're really seeing him. Like, I mean, there's like a point where he just punches, this woman right in the face and starts, like using a belt on her and stuff. And, it's kind of like the Twilight Zone movie to a certain degree. And there was actually an older episode, with the young actor from Lost in Space that actually grew up to become a director himself. But this kid has the penchant to create drawings. He has a bully in school, and if he crumples the paper up, it turns out he could actually injures the bully. So he does that with with his stepfather, I guess it is, and crumples the paper, and then you basically like see him like all twisted up and stuff like that. But I mean, really powerful performance by just a comedic actor. And then it turns out that the reason why David Alan Grier was chosen was obviously, because he's playing against character, but also he was a Shakespearean actor, Shakespearean trained. Honestly, I didn't know that until I had done my research. But then, through the, the thread of this, particular, morgue, anthology thread that's going on, it turns out that the mortician is actually the devil. And really great effects by Screaming Mad George, like devil effects. It kind of looks, he kind of looks like, like cancerous skin. He's got horns, and, like the morgue turns into like, just, fiery hell, hellfire, and fabulous anthology. And I know they did a remake, or they did a sequel with Keith David that just came out not too long ago. I haven't seen it. As much as I love Keith David, man, I don't know if it would hold a candle to this. I mean, I'll have to find out. But yeah, Tales from the Hood is super important. When it comes to just a black horror anthology that's being really serious, in tone and topic, but at the same time being really super fun to watch. All right, so before we leave 90s, I do want to actually like shine a spotlight on Ernest Dickerson, who obviously did episodes of Dexter, Walking Dead, made movies like Bulletproof with Denzel Washington. Fabulous fucking director, and made two really fun movies, and one does, a lot of people don't know about, and one that a lot of people know about. So I did want to reflect on Bones for a minute with Snoop Dogg. Really great, fun movie, I thought. And honestly, really great performance by Snoop Dogg, who plays, against type, obviously, at this point in his career, he's always talking about being a pimp and all this other stuff. But he does play a pimp in the movie who is, betrayed and murdered. Even his girlfriend, played by Pam Grier, is actually forced to, stab him a couple times. But he's a pimp who actually gives back to the community. You know what I mean? So he's actually like a really solid guy for the most part. So that was an interesting play on, the, just the whole, pimp, whatever you want to call it, like that characterization.
The stereotype, yeah.
Yeah. But just a really fun slasher movie where he actually gets, he gets revenge, his spirit comes back. Ironically enough, his spirit is in a dog for a while. No, just a really fun, just a really fun movie. Really just a really fun watch. but it was interesting just to see like, you know, that difference, you know, when it comes to like, you know, his characterization. And really, you know, like Snoop Dogg's, you know, like he's not a bad actor at all. And then of course Ernest Dickerson went on to do Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, but we didn't really reflect on Jada Pinkett. But you know, Jada Pinkett was important in that movie because, you know, her character is, you know, she is an ex-con. You know, she's, you know, done some wrong in her life. But this is really the first time ever that we're seeing a woman of color playing the final girl. And I think, you know, that's why, you know, like, you know, aside from just, you know, Demon Knight, you know, being important to us as horror fans, it's also very culturally important as well, you know, because she is a survivor at the end of the movie and ends up practically, you know, saving the world to a certain degree, because she's the one that has to, like, you know, she's the charge of Jesus's blood at the end of the movie. You know what I mean? So she becomes the striker character, you know, and she has to, you know, like basically, you know, like keep demonic hands, you know, from, you know, getting their hands on this blood, you know, to, you know, pretty much like, you know, implode the world or whatever they're going to do, whatever the plan is. But yeah, that's another important one. Just the fact that, you know, that's really the first time where we're seeing, like I said, a Black woman, you know, surviving in a horror film and just becoming like, you know, super important to the narrative.
I wanted to start off the 2000s with a movie that we don't usually think about in terms of horror, but is nevertheless part of the legacy because it went on to become an incredibly successful franchise and parody pretty much every horror movie ever made. And that is a Scary Movie, which came out in 2000, was actually directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans, Black comedian. And I don't know if you probably do remember when the trailer for that first one came out, but people were just on the floor.
Yeah.
Because horror was a genre that, I mean, aside from some campy blaxploitation stuff in the 70s, always took itself really seriously. And I don't know. I feel like the Scary Movie franchise is worth mentioning in that.
But Keenen just had fun with, you know, like not even just like, you know, different stylings of comedy, but also he just played with race. You know what I mean? Like gave you a chance to laugh at yourself. You know,
well,
like,
exactly. That's part of why they were so transgressive and you know, shocking at the time. You know, is because this was a Black comedian being like, okay, I'm gonna call everybody out, and I'm gonna be really crass about, you know, these issues, and whereas if it, you know, if it were a white dude, it would be like, okay.
What's next on our list for the 2000s?
Well, for Black icons, I just wanted to mention really quick Naomi Harris's role on 28 Days Later.
Oh yeah,
because that was a seminal film that had a huge impact, and again,
her color did not come into play.
I was just gonna say it was refreshing to see like this was a basic like horror post-apocalyptic plot with a romance subplot that you know, and then there was no. It's really refreshing to see a film that can play out the whole way through and scare you to death, and just it's kind of like Night of the Living Dead, like not like make this really strong character that's not really about their race.
So let's talk about, because we mentioned this in our Alien episode, but never really got into it. Very vocal young man when it comes to Black Lives Matter. Let us talk about our wonderful John Boyega, my boy.
And that was also a really
super important film, yeah,
revolutionary film at the time, because everybody's seen alien invasion movies, but you know, to put an alien invasion in the context of, you know, these teenagers, these inner city Black teenagers, like it all of a sudden it's a different story, you know? And it was so refreshing and so well acted, and just, oh, I love that film so much.
Well,
and John Boyega.
He really had no direction and no future. He was just like a punk, to everybody. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to go to college, that that kind of thing. But that ending really, like, I think speaks volumes. When the city starts cheering for him, start calling his name and stuff. That was something we didn't mention the last time, how important that is, that you're seeing this young inner city youth, like, actually becoming a hero and doing something that people will remember forever,
And he's still a hero. I love John Boyega. He's amazing. He's just, he's a great actor and a great artist and a great person.
For sure. So let's talk about Jordan Peele, because obviously, like, this was where it was going to end. One of my favorite visionaries of all time. This guy has proven time and time again that he's got, like, everything and then some, when it comes to, like, just style and vision and, production quality. And a lot of people said, like, oh, this guy's a one-trick pony. That is not true.
No way.
No.
No way.
He really, I think the reason why he hosts the new Twilight Zone is because really he is like the Black Rod Serling. He's got that kind of a mind where he's just got stories for days and days and days and days.
And he's proven, like what I was saying later about how the Black experience can transform a story into something it wasn't before. Mm-hmm. I think that's become super clear with Jordan Peele's films, and with the way that the horror genre in general is making room for that kind of horror story. Mm-hmm. The upcoming film Antebellum is an incredibly
I can't wait to see
good example of a movie that would not exist without this Black perspective that it needed.
Sure.
And the fact that we're getting movies like that now, and stuff like, and we're seeing more Black creators and Black actors in the genre. Mm-hmm. And I feel Jordan Peele is he's absolutely indispensable when it comes to that, because mm-hmm. not only is he a great voice himself, but he will use his name to
like take the hand of others,
and give the directing chair to another up and coming Black director, which is so cool and so important.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on Get Out? I'll let you go first, because
it was deemed like super controversial, I guess, when it came out.
Yeah, I remember that.
Because,
that was weird.
Because white people are not used to being
the villain.
Exactly. Like, mm-hmm. because and their whiteness is the villain, and the whole metaphor of like them implanting their grandmother's brains into Black bodies and using them for that mm-hmm. is just like, it's terrifying, and it's disgusting, and I think a lot of people were, like I said earlier, like a lot of people were taken aback by it because it is a movie about the horror of being Black around people that you assume are your friends, and even your loved ones, and people who seem to care about you, and it's really just a big fucking conspiracy.
Well, I believe it was, and I'm paraphrasing here, I believe Malcolm X said something along the lines of, I trust a Southern wolf, before I trust a Northern hound. And I think what he meant by that was, like, if you're talking to a Southerner that hates your guts because of your color, it's right there out in the fucking open. That this person hates you. You know what I mean? But then you have somebody who's just like, hashtag Black Lives Matter, and changing their profile picture, Blackout Tuesday and all this other stuff. And I think it was Van Jones from CNN that said it recently. Like, I think white people all have the penchant for this disease. So you could be well-intentioned, but at the same time, you become that Karen that, ends up, calling, the cops on a bird watcher who, like, because you're scared of being raped in the park, which just so happens this man was a fabulous, innovator when it comes to comic books, worked for Marvel Comics, made some, groundbreaking characters and stuff, but you just saw a black man. And I think that's what, like he was trying to say in context of that particular phrase.
Oh, totally. And there's so much fantastic dialogue in Get Out that just addresses that in a way that's like, oh, it just hits perfectly. Like when his white girlfriend at the beginning of the movie is saying like, oh, my dad totally voted for Obama both terms. Like,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
But then like if you just remember in the beginning, where he's just walking down the street, like in a white neighborhood, and contextually that obviously has to do with Trayvon Martin, being shot, for wearing a hoodie because of that piece of shit. Like it plays into that too, that you can't even walk in. Recently, I live in Georgia, and we just had, the horrible incident with Ahmaud Arbery, and that's all he was doing. He was just jogging on his own street, so even, like walking through like, a white neighborhood is dangerous. I can't,
yep.
We can't even scratch the surface of what it is. Like we said before in the beginning of the show, we can't even scratch the surface to even understand what it's like to live the Black experience, which is, like in many degrees terrifying. And I think Get Out probably showed that more than anything else, I think. And also too, I'd written an article about this, a long article about this, a couple of years ago. And, I think also, I don't even necessarily think it's through fear. I think, it's just, like you just want to have a common ground with, somebody of color. So, you'll see like, white guys hanging around black guys that just use slang for some reason, that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Because you're trying to relate somehow. But there's just so many ways that you could just make somebody feel uncomfortable and not even really know it either,
Yeah.
What are your feelings on Us? Because I this is a very divisive film. I know, like, there's people that love it and there's people that absolutely hate it, and I don't think they understood it. So
I like it. I enjoyed it very much. I mean, I didn't think it was as good as Get Out.
Mm-hmm.
But not for any of the reasons that it, didn't address whatever issues, or like it. Us was a film where I felt like Jordan Peele was trying to prove that he's not just like, oh, here's a shocking horror film, that's all I can do, now moving on. Like, I feel like Us was Jordan Peele being like, I can do this. I can come up with a creepy plot with black characters as the main characters that isn't about like, that doesn't have the same like racial terror as Get Out did.
I disagree. Absolutely, I disagree with you. I'm sorry, because first of all, if you recall, when she's a young girl and she's at the amusement park, the Hall of Mirrors that she initially went into, was all like, old, like stereotypical Native Americans and stuff like that. And if you actually go to Santa Monica when she's an adult, they switched it to more modernized, like, like it's a wizard now. It has to do with wizards and stuff like that. So they took all the stereotypical context out, you know what I mean? So I think a lot of it has to do with gentrification, black, the black experience of, living in white America and somehow like, like trying to fit in, like, I need to get a boat. I need to get, I need to get my raises and all this stuff so I can, like acclimate to white society. But the stain of the past is always going to be there. You know what I mean? Like, you're always going to be tethered to the darkness of Black history, regardless, of the whitewashing that anybody tries to do. It still exists. You know what I mean? The other thing too is like the tethered were basically kind of like they weren't just mirror images of these people. They were, you know, kind of like emotionally and psychically linked to them. So the father, you know, was technically a workhorse. Like, you know, I need to work hard, you know, to make a better life for my family. So his doppelganger would obviously be like the more lumbering, you know, strong guy. You know what I mean? And then you've got the son that was into magic, and then of course, you know, like his tethered was, you know, a burn victim. You know, because he kept playing with fire and, you know, like never got burned, you know, but this, you know, particular version did. And then the daughter wanted to quit track, and the tethered of her, like, you know, loved to run. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah, well, I also thought it was significant that the tethered were almost, it was difficult for them to speak.
Yeah.
Both, their speech was very forced.
Yeah.
Basically they had been silenced this whole time.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
Lupita Nyong'o, first of all, snubbed. She should have been nominated for that performance. The research that she did to get the tone of that voice, and just everything that she did was just amazing. Incredible. But the other great thing about that particular film is that, you know, Poltergeist is known for, like, you know, like you're basically seeing, like you're seeing a well-to-do white family, you know what I mean? Very happy, you know, and like, you know, even just the, you know, the conversations that they're having, like the, you know, when the Freelings, the mother and father, like, you know, he's like sucking his belly in and out, and they're smoking a joint in the bedroom. They're just completely in love with each other. And, you know, with this, like, you know, this is the first time you're actually seeing like a black family that's just, you know, natural and normal. You know what I mean?
I would say first time in horror. Yes, definitely. I feel like there have been other films that do that, but like venturing into the genre space with that, for some reason, has always been marginalized.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't understand why, because, you know, as I said, like, it becomes a completely new story when you tell it from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even though this is not a movie, but while we're talking about horror and black creators, I want to give a shout out to a great ongoing Image comic right now called Philadelphia, which is
which actually got picked up for a series recently.
Yeah, well, it's sort of, and it's sort of about these, you know, they find out that the vampires were something started by the founding fathers. It's like this insidious systemic thing. So it's sort of substituting vampirism for racism in that way. Yeah. And the art is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I totally highly recommend that. And I'm not surprised it's been picked up for a series, because it's really, really fucking good.
I've got the trade paperback ordered. I got it back ordered for when it comes out, because I'm from Philadelphia. I was excited as hell to see that. I was like, oh, Philadelphia. And also, you know, want to give a quick shout out too, because, you know, around the time that we're recording this, they just put out the main trailer for Lovecraft Country, which looks fabulous. And again, you know, from the mind of Jordan Peele, like he produces it, but you know, it does, you know, play into the ideal of systemic racism, and, you know, like, you know, what happened, you know, throughout Black history with this Lovecraft spin. Whew, it just looks fantastic, and that comes out in August.
You know what else is perfect about that? I'm a huge Lovecraft fan. We know this. I've read all of his stuff.
Well, I know the name of Lovecraft's cat.
I'm obsessed with it. He was an incredibly racist individual.
Superbly racist.
And a lot of it leaked into his stories. And I don't deny that. And of course, there are people who can't enjoy his stories because of that, and I don't blame them either.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're calling it Lovecraft Country, and it would be, you know, something that he would be horrified of.
Well, that's our episode, guys. I hope that you feel that we did the history of Black horror cinema justice. Again, you know, we're not historians. We don't necessarily know what the experience is like. You know, we just thought it was important, you know, and not just, you know, for this moment, you know, we were eventually going to get here anyway. We just thought this is this is the opportunistic time to talk about how wonderful and fantastic Black visionaries are, and the great things that they're constantly bringing to this genre. And I'm so happy, just like Holly said, to see these barriers being broken. It seems like all the barriers are gone for the most part when it comes to, you know, like Black storytelling, you know, when it comes to, you know, well, our genre and sci-fi and, you know, all those things, drama. So that's great to see. And you know, we really just didn't, we just wanted to be positive about it. We didn't want to reflect a light on, you know, all the negativity that's going on right now, because, you know, I'm sure Holly will attest to it just like I do. Black lives do fucking matter.
Well, yeah, they fucking matter. And if you say, well, wait a minute, just get the fuck out. Seriously. Like,
yeah, for sure.
There's nothing. If you even try to argue with that statement, fuck off.
There's no argument. There's no argument. Black lives matter. So that's our episode, guys. Join us next time, and we'll scare you later. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Cheers.